What's going on, everybody? This is Always Talking Ball. We are back with another Win Totals episode. This time it is America's Conference, or as some may call it, the Conference of Chaos. That's right, it's the Big 12 Conference. We're first going to talk some national headlines because fall camps are in full swing. We'll also touch on the Big 12 Conference as a whole. We'll get into some win totals, dark horses, conference championship picks. As always, I'm Tyler Noe. That's Lance Barton. Thank you guys for tuning in. Like and subscribe and follow on whatever app or website you're listening to us on right now, and share it. Don't forget, tomorrow, August 9th, the Home Field Apparel Premium Team Boxes are releasing. Head over to homefieldapparel.com. Pick out your team's box, click checkout, type in ATB15 in the promo code section, and then click purchase. Your gear will be here by week 1, and you will be ready to go. Homefieldapparel.com, promo code ATB15 for 15% off. Lance, we've got some national stories to touch on, and unfortunately, it's not great news for everybody. We got to start in South Bend, where the news broke on Monday, I believe, that projected starting left tackle Charles Jagusaw out for the season with a torn pec. And I can't help but think the game I'm going to be attending there on August 31st, Texas A&M, Shamar Turner, Nick Scourton, they could go wild that first game unless Notre Dame puts someone there in the left tackle. Normally it's not a big deal, but when you're already replacing Blake Fisher and especially Joe Alt on the left side, it could spell some trouble.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it already, that it's kind of strange that Notre Dame going into this year, probably the biggest question mark they've got is offensive line. But Notre Dame is one of those programs where I just trust them, man, to get it right as far as offensive line is concerned. And also with the new scheme that they're going to be bringing in with offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock and Riley Leonard's ability to be able to move and use his feet. You hope that negates some of that if there are some issues at left tackle with whoever they're going. I know they had a position battle going on at right tackle. So it sounds like that the two guys that were battling for the right tackle spot, that one of them is just going to move over to the left. But yeah, Nick Scourton and Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, Mike Elko's defense at Texas A&M there in College Station week 1. That is a tough assignment for any left tackle to have to deal with that defensive front. So a first-time starting left tackle, that'll be interesting to see, and a storyline to keep an eye on for week 1.
Yep. In the SEC, a lot of news coming out. Tennessee was already going to be a little suspect in the secondary, but they lost starting defensive back, starting star position, hybrid position. Jordan Thomas out for the season with a knee injury. When you're facing the quarterbacks and the potent offenses you do in the SEC, losing one of your projected starters is never a good thing.
No, it's not. And, you got to think, too, like I said, Tennessee actually played some pretty solid defense last year. You've pointed that out before, how they had a top 25 overall defense last year. But the offenses in the SEC are going to be so good this year. Probably the best year overall as an entirety of across the entire conference. Probably the best group of offenses they've ever had in the SEC. So you better be able to get a few stops, but you better have a trump card on your offense, which I believe Tennessee does with their offense with Josh Heupel and Nico Iamaleava. So, just be interested. You never want to lose anybody to injury, but if you're going to lose guys, if you're going to lose somebody, it probably needs to be earlier in the year like this, in fall camp, where you have time to run some guys in and out to see what you've got at those spots. You have time before you get to your first game. Like in Tennessee, their first big test will be NC State and Charlotte. So you got a little bit of a dress rehearsal there before you play NC State. So be interesting to see what Tennessee's defense looks like. Like you said, they're thin in the secondary already, but at least, Heupel and that coaching staff has a little time to adjust.
Yep. A little running back news in the SEC. Montrell Johnson starting running back for Florida. If it wasn't bad for Florida already with their schedule and everything they face, losing their starting running back in camp, we don't know when he's going to be back. They're kind of keeping that close to the vest. What can you tell us about that situation? And obviously, the news that broke yesterday or, maybe Tuesday about the injury reports needing to be kind of out before, kickoff now, which is big for, obviously the gambling angle, but obviously we'll know, whether, he's going to be playing or not a couple days before that first game too.
Yeah, and Montrell Johnson is, again, there's a lot of good backs in the SEC, but he's one of your better ones. So losing him would be a huge blow for them, but it's not out of the question yet. It's not said that he's not playing against Miami yet. It's still up in the air. But if he is not playing, even if he is playing, a lot of stuff coming out of Florida's camp from the spring game, summer camp, and now even through fall camp that freshman Jaden Ball is a dude. And you're not sure if you can trust him in pass blocking schemes as a true freshman tailback like that right out of the gate against Miami. But Florida's got a couple of other backs in behind Montrell Johnson. Jaden Ball's one of them, but Ball's one of those that every time he touches the rock, he's a threat to get to the end zone. So he's a name to keep an eye on, even if Montrell Johnson's playing. But if he's not, he's going to get more carries right out of the gate.
And one of the running backs, probably one of the top running backs in the SEC, one that everyone was really looking forward to watching this year, C.J. Baxter, went down with a knee injury. That some were calling it kind of like just a freak injury, but I'm not sure he hurt a pop or anything like that. MRI results came back. They're keeping those close to the vest. I guess I heard he's getting second opinions or not, but what would that do to Texas's offense if C.J. Baxter is possibly out for an extended period of time, especially with that Michigan game looming in week 2?
Yeah, so I mean, Texas has dudes all over that roster, but they actually not very deep at the tailback position overall. So losing Brooks to the NFL, they've got a couple solid backs there, but Baxter obviously was the lead guy. I mean, he's one of the top tailbacks, if not the top tailback in the country coming out of high school, depending on which publication you look at. But they're not very deep at the tailback position. And if you look at Sark's offenses dating back to when he came back from the NFL to Alabama, he's always had a big-time tailback threat to utilize in his offense in the play-action pass game that he was obviously planning on using with Ewers again this year. So if they don't have a big-time running threat, that's something to keep an eye on with Texas this year with this offense. If they can be as explosive and as good as they want to be, they need a really good tailback presence in Sark's offense.
Yep. All right, Lance, hit us with some Big 12 storylines. Let's get into this conference that some are touting as America's Conference, Conference of Chaos. We've got some new teams, and a lot of those new teams seem like they can be a big player for the conference championship this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's polarizing this year with, the Arizona schools, obviously, with Prime and Colorado coming back to the Big 12, and Kyle Whittingham and the Utes of Utah. I mean, they are one that you think that will probably have some sustained success. I'll just ask you the same question I asked you on our previous ACC episode. Of those 4 teams, is Utah the easy answer on who you think can have the longest sustained success in the conference?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and you talked about it when you hopped on CFB Focus the other day with Mike Waxman. We don't know how long Whittingham is going to be around, so that kind of gives you a little pause. Obviously, they turned over from Urban Meyer to Kyle Whittingham seamlessly. Kyle Whittingham to Morgan Scalley, we assume will go pretty well. Usually that's kind of just how Utah does things. But there's been a lot of talk this offseason about Brent Brennan in Arizona.
Yep.
And being in Arizona, I think that's just the Southwest, close to California there. They could recruit really well. He comes from San Jose State, so he was recruited California before. They've already got a bunch of guys left over from Jed Fish era. And so you could see Arizona contend out of those 4 teams for, most staying power with Utah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Bear Down is definitely one to keep an eye on. You just got to wonder if, they had all those issues with athletic funding, et cetera. You just got to wonder if they've got the staying power with, as far as in today's age of NIL, if they can be able to, pay enough to keep players and to bring players in. They obviously did something right, being able to keep Tetero McMillan and Noah Fafita from going elsewhere, because you got to know that everybody was after those guys. So they've obviously got something in the cupboard there as far as NIL funding is concerned. But you called it the Conference of Chaos, America's Conference. And the reason why everybody's calling it that is because there is legitimately, we had Kelly Ford on here recently, and he definitely agreed. He said there were 10 teams that you could make a case and make an argument that could win this conference. We agree 100% with that as well. You can take a look, and there's a 16-team conference. There are 10 teams going into this year that have a path to win this conference. There's not a ton that separates the number 1 team with the number 10 team. And when we talk about these win totals that we're about to talk about, who can win one-score games? Who can get over the hump in tight football games? That's what this conference is going to be this year. You're going to have a lot of closely contested games in the Big 12 this year. So unbalanced schedules, tougher schedules, where you play teams, etc., are going to matter just as much in any other conference as they're going to matter in this conference as well. So should be a fun year, man. Like I said, it's going to be an incredible ride with the Big 12 this year.
One interesting note about the Big 12, and they are kind of being looked at with the ACC as like just lower tier than the SEC and the Big 10. And this isn't the end-all be-all, but we're big fans of Pick Six previews around here. We read their magazine, in the offseason before the season. And out of his top, Power 5 rankings, and he ranks all 70 Power 5 teams, 9 of the top 34 in his rankings are from the Big 12, and which is second to only the SEC, who has 11 of the top 34, but that's more than the Big 10. Obviously, it's more than the AC, but more than the Big 10, too. So it's kind of like, they have Utah, they have Kansas State. These teams are ranked highly in a lot of preview magazines. And if you think about Utah, too, we can touch on them real quick. Just, them and Kansas State are the favorites, but Utah starters and backups last season missed 157 games total. Kyle Whittingham has been coaching for 40 years, and he says it was unlike anything he's ever seen before.
Yep. Yeah, it's, with the amount of production that they've got coming back, and like you said, the overall depth of the Big Ten, the Big Ten's got, again, very top-heavy overall, but like we just said, there are 10 teams in the Big 12 that can play and have a shot to win this conference. So that kind of surprises me a little bit that many in the top, like whatever you said, 30-something there. 30, yeah. But at the same time, not really that shocking because there's not a ton that separates these 10 teams from each other.
Yep. All right, man, you want to get into it? Do you want to kick us off with your first win total that you love for the Big 12 conference this year?
Yeah, I'm going to kick it off here. I'm going to go with, you just touched on them. Again, I'm not going to fool around. Just like in the ACC, I started out with one of the big boys in Clemson. I'm going to start right out of the gate here with our boy Kyle Whittingham and the Utah Utes. And I just got to say, Cam Rising is back, baby. And boy, do they need him. Like you just touched on it, you said the starters and backups missed a combined total of 157 games last year due to injury, and they still managed to win 8 games last year. The offense, under Andy Ludwig, like last year they were 100th in scoring offense and 94th in total offense. But they've got a lot returning this year that again that were missed due to injury last year. This is probably the best. We heard Kyle Whittingham on Mac and Cube here recently. Mackerel and Cube, look at Jocks 94.5 there in Birmingham, Alabama. They had Kyle Whittingham on their show, and he said that this was the best skill position group he's had in a long time. Micah Bernard's back at running back, and they brought in an FCS All-American and Anthony Woods, who rushed for over 1,000 yards and 16 tutties last year at Idaho. They're bringing in, USC transfer receiver Dorian Singer, who he led the Pac-12 in receiving a couple of years ago at Arizona with over 1,100 yards receiving. Micah Pittman is back this year as well. He's a double transfer from Oregon to Florida State, and then now at Utah. He's in the slot. And Money Parks is also back. And they've got probably the deepest tight end room in the entire country with Brent Keithy being back. He's one of your top pro prospects for the tight end position. And Landon King, who started in Keithy's absence last year because Keithy was one of those many players that were out injured. He was one of the top tight end transfers they brought in one of the top tight end transfers in the country, and Carson Ryan as well. And then a name to keep an eye on that even Whittingham talked about in this interview the other day was, you and I talked about this in the as soon as this happened. I said, this is the most Kyle Whittingham Utah thing ever. At the end of the year, everybody's probably going to end up knowing this guy's name. Don't be shocked if he's catching alley-oops in the back of the end zone. I'm using alley-oops for hoops reference because Caleb Lohner, a 6'8", 240-pound Baylor basketball transferred to Utah to play tight end. And we've seen many guys in the past that have made that transition from hoops to football, and especially the tight end position, that have had a lot of success. So don't be shocked if this guy is catching passes in a mismatch matchup nightmare roaming in the secondary, defensive secondaries. And Morgan Scalley, again, back as defensive coordinator, was named coach in waiting. The offense was, abysmal last year, but they were top 20 in scoring defense and total defense last year. They were 8th in third down defense, and they were really good at getting teams off the field. They were 4th in rush defense. They returned 70% of that defensive production, 8 starters total. So, and because of all the injuries that they had last year, they also return a lot of just overall snaps in the 2 deep. And Utah is one of those teams that nobody is better at defending their home field than the Utes. They're 32-3. 32-3 at Rice-Eccles since 2018. So when you look at their schedule, they get a lot of the meat of their schedule at Rice-Eccles, and probably their 2 toughest games are at Oklahoma State and the last game of the year, one to keep an eye on, because there's probably going to be a lot riding on this game, maybe for both teams. And that is November the 29th in the Bounce House at UCF. So at UCF and at Oklahoma State are games that, again, Utah is pretty much automatic at home. Getting those 2 teams away should be interesting. But I like Utah over 9.5. With Cam Rising back, with all they're bringing back overall and experience, the production, etc. Love the coaching continuity at Utah. Utah's got one of the best overall as far as head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator trios in the entire country. They're top 5, in my opinion, in that category. So Cam Rising being back, coaching continuity, everything else, I'll take Utah over 9.5.
Okay, I like that. I think Utah's going to have a good year. I think everyone thinks Utah's going to have a good year with Cam Rising back if he can stay healthy. So that's a big caveat there. But I'm going to go with another coaching mainstay here, Mike Gundy and the Oklahoma State Cowboys. You and I, we talked about it many times. Cashing the over 6.5 last year. They started it out at 7.5. Most books have gone to 8.5. I actually found an Oklahoma State over 8 as of Wednesday night on DraftKings. Now, caveat here is if you can find a conference win total, which we know DraftKings does, if you can find a conference win total of 5.5, I would take that instead. But I'm probably going to be on Oklahoma State every year until it fails. And you talk about Mike Gundy and his staying power along with Kyle Whittingham, 18 consecutive bowl games for the Oklahoma State Cowboys, right? Last year, though, was such a crazy year for Oklahoma State, right? They start off the year, week 2, I believe, just getting absolutely blitzed at home, getting booed off their home field by South Alabama, like 33-7 or something like that. Then they catch fire over the next 5 or 6 weeks. They beat Oklahoma in the last Bedlam game as we know it until they schedule it again. And then what was it? The very next week or 2 weeks later, they go to the Bounce House. They lose by 39 points. And then the last 2 weeks of the season, they've got to win to even have a chance to get to the Big 12 championship game. They fall behind by 2 scores in both of those games, only to come back and win both of them. For the first time in school history, they won consecutive games when trailing by 14 points. And they made the Big 12 championship game. Lost to Texas, obviously. But they cashed that over for us. This year, 90% returning production. The offensive line has more than 200 combined starts between them. And I put out my best offensive lines in the country a couple weeks ago on social media, and it was a big oversight by me to not include Oklahoma State on that list.
The Pokes fans let you hear about it too.
They did. And they're starting, along with those 200 starts, they've got 6 redshirt seniors that are starting. And a 7th-year quarterback, right? 7th-year quarterback to go along with it.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's definitely benefiting from that COVID year this year. No
Again, and they got Ollie Gordon, reigning Doak Walker Award winner, come back. If their defense improves, that was their Achilles heel last year. If their defense improves, they can win this conference for sure. They can win this conference. Now we get to the schedule, and there's a reason I said if you can find the 5.5 conference wins, I would take that. Because if you can find the 8 on DraftKings, take it. But at 8.5 most places, but you open up with the FCS champions, South Dakota State. right? You never want to play South Dakota State or
Jackrabbit
North Dakota
City.
State. Yes.
Yep.
They get a home game next with Arkansas, which is an SEC school, right? But Pittman's on the hot seat. We don't know what Arkansas is going to be like. A lot of people think they're still going to be down. Still going to be a tough game. Then they go on the road to play Tulsa. They should win that game. But again, they should have beat South Alabama last year and not lost by 26. So in the non-conference, it gives you a little pause a little bit. And then weeks 4 and 5, we've said it all along, their schedule is middle of the pack in the Big 12, but it's going to come down to weeks 4 and 5. Home against Utah, very next week going on the road against Kansas State. Those games are going to be tough, and they're projected to be a slight favorite in the Utah game, probably going to be close to a pick 'em. Kansas State, they're going to probably be a touchdown underdog in that game. West Virginia the next week. So if you're targeting the over 8, you got to get to at least 8 wins, right? You're going to push. If you get to 9, great. I think they're going to get to 10. I think they're going to win all 3 non-conference games. I think they're going to start the season a lot better than they were last year, and that's because they're like the 4th most experienced team in the country. Utah, Kansas State, I'm going to say they split those, right? So you got 4 and 1 there. You get West Virginia at home at T-Boone's Pickens Stadium. That's a win. That's 5 wins right there. Your road games next are at BYU and Baylor. You could trip up, kind of like we're talking about, some teams in the Big Ten or ACC, where we're talking about Virginia Tech not being worried about them being up for the Clemson game. It's that Stanford game on a Friday night that you're worried about, right? So it's just a BYU on a Friday night, playing in a different time zone, just kind of worries you a little bit. But again, Arizona State and Texas Tech still at home at Colorado to end the season. It's a light schedule. I think Oklahoma State can get to at least 8. If they do, you push. If they get to 9, you're winner at all books. So I'm going to take Mike Gundy until it fails, and I'm going to take Oklahoma State over 8.
Yeah, and one thing to remind folks is, too, like you were talking about, like Oklahoma State struggles last year early on when they got waxed by South Alabama, that head scratcher. They didn't make the move to a run heavy with Ollie Gordon until after that game. Mm-hmm. They just completely changed up their stuff, which, hats off to Mike Gundy and that staff for doing that and making adjustments like they did. But their season completely took off when they decided they were just going to ride that horse in Ollie Gordon. So I would imagine with the experience that they've got and stuff, like you said, that going into this year, that some of those sleepy spots early on that they won't be caught napping like they were last year. But I'm going to take a long trip, and conference realignment here. We're spread out all over the map now. I'm going to take a little trip down to sunny Orlando, Florida, to the Bounce House to hang out and have a conversation with old Gus Bus and Gus Malzahn. And UCF, the Knights are sitting here with a win total of 7.5. And you and I have talked a lot about this team here in the offseason and the momentum that they've got right now. So I love UCF over 7.5 this year. And 4 of their 5 Big 12 losses last year, they had double-digit leads, and they blew them in the second half. Now, I believe that happened because they made that jump from the group of 5 into the power conferences, and I just think that a lot of that had to do with some of the issues with the depth, going into those games. So, like I said, they went to Oklahoma.
3 of those losses were by a combined 4 points.
Right, exactly. And they went to Oklahoma, did everything but win that game on the scoreboard. You already talked about how they beat the brakes off of Oklahoma State when they came down to the Bounce House. They had like a 28-point lead against Baylor and blew it in the second half. So UCF landed the number 3 class in the Big 12 this year in a top 25 transfer class. That was a school record recruiting class overall this year. Their offense was 5th in the nation last year in rushing, 8th in total offense, and they bring in KJ Jefferson from Arkansas. Some people are down on him because of the year that he had last year. Dude, that was because of Dan Enos, a terrible offensive line, no weapons around him. He's playing in the SEC. In 2021 and 2022, KJ Jefferson had 45 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. And UCF brings back running back RJ Harvey, who had over 1,400 yards rushing last year, which is 3rd in UCF history, and he had 16 touchdowns. They also brought in Penny Boone, who was the MAC Offensive Player of the Year last year, who also had 1,400 yards rushing and 15 touchdowns. So between R.J. Harvey, Penny Boone, and K.J. Jefferson in that backfield altogether in a Gus Malzahn type rushing attack, Big 12 defenses are going to have a complete headache trying to deal with that bunch. UCF also has weapons on the outside led by returning Kobe Hudson. They added Javarius Johnson from Auburn in the transfer portal. Where I have hesitance here is the defense. The defense last year, they were just gashed. They were 125th in the country in rush defense, giving up 194 yards per game. But they added several players in the transfer portal, several guys along the D-line and linebacker room that all had productive starting experience at other power programs. UCF was top 20 against the pass last year, and they also added some transfers from places like Ohio State and Ole Miss and USC. So I love what they've done in talent acquisition down there in Orlando in the bounce house. So their win total's at 7.5. That means that I've got to find 5 losses on this schedule. The games that you take a look at are at TCU, at Florida, at Iowa State, and they play at West Virginia and Utah. Those are games that you could say, do I think they're going to lose all those games? No, I don't. I think that talent-wise, overall, athletes, KJ at quarterback, in a conference that is going to be just wide open. UCF's going to be a lot of fun this year. I think they minimum go 8-4, and so I like UCF over 7.5.
Love it, man. I'm with you on that one.
Okay,
UCF over 7.5. I've got them at 9-3.
Okay,
and they're one of the 4 teams. Again, we don't know how the tiebreakers are going to work in the Big 12, but they're one of the 4 teams that I have finishing at 7-2 in the conference. I don't have them making the conference championship game just because I tried to do the math in my head about, tiebreakers and head-to-head and all that stuff. I'd be, like you said, the skill players abound, man. This should be the best offense that Gus has had in Orlando. The defense, it struggled. I think their D-line is strong, though. I mean, Ricky Barber's coming back. He had 39 quarterback pressures last year. Lee Hunter had 41 stops. They're both back. They're more experienced. I think that they will be better. Again, look at the schedule. 5 home games. You got the 4th easiest conference schedule. You don't play Kansas State, you don't play Kansas, and you don't play Oklahoma State, and you get Utah and Arizona both at home, like you said. Yep. So, I mean, you got to find 5 losses, and I just can't do it. And, I mean, you could say they could go in to that Florida game and win in the Swamp, too. I mean, that's, kind of an in-state. They want to make it an in-state rivalry game now. They're both Power 4 and everything, but
if you made a list of the sneaky best games of the year, that one would be a candidate. That's going to be a huge game in the state of Florida. UCF getting a shot at the Gators in Gainesville in the Swamp. Who knows what Billy Napier's Florida team is going to be like at that time. I'm higher on Florida than probably most are. Surprise, I was last year too, but I am again this year. But whatever's going on with that Florida team, if they are struggling a little bit going into that game, could you imagine the Gator Nation if UCF comes into the Swamp and beats Florida at Florida? And they definitely can. I mean, KJ Jefferson did it last year at Arkansas. Yeah, I love UCF over 7.5. So I also have them 9-3.
Yep. So 9-3 for UCF. We're both on the over 7.5 there. I'm going to take one that's not going to be popular amongst the college football casuals here, and I'm going to go against.
Oh no!
I'm going to go against Coach Prime and Colorado again, and it's kind of like the same thing as Oklahoma State. Until you prove to me that you can win at a consistent level, not just go 3-0 and have a hype machine all around you and then win one game the rest of the year. This again, they're over under set at 5.5 right now. Just wait. And the books may tick this up to 6 because it's going to keep betting over. People are going to keep betting it. I mean, the hype that came out with EA Sports College Football.
Yeah, it's a lot. They're becoming a liability issue for books as far as the amount of bets that are coming in on them.
And being ranked 20th in that video game only, skyrocketed the hype even more, even though a lot of us knew that was a complete joke. But I'm going to take them under 5.5 wins. And that's you're telling me you got to get to a bowl game with Colorado, which I think would be a huge success for this team. Skill positions, never a question. Shadur Sanders, if they can get to 8 or 9 wins somehow this year, they would obviously make me look like a fool. But 8 or 9 wins for Colorado, and that means he plays out of his mind. He's going to be in New York as a Heisman finalist at 8 or 9 wins.
Hey, he's got some dudes to sling it to, though. Like you said, skill position wise, the receiver position at Colorado is insane this year.
Yep. So, yeah, the skill position is never a question. Travis Hunter plays both ways. He can do pretty much everything. He could probably be backup quarterback if Shadur gets hurt. Again, the trenches, huge liability. The defensive line's probably a little better than the offensive line. Obviously Jordan Seaton's coming in, true freshman. He's going to start at left tackle. I mean, we saw what happened even with guys like Caden Proctor last year. It was just an up and down season for him. So it's going to be an up and down season for Jordan Seaton, and he's going to be their best offensive lineman, like no doubt. So I think you're going to see more 1 and 2 tight end sets this year to protect Shadur a little more, to give him a little more time to get the ball to those playmakers. But man, Colorado, just an absolutely brutal schedule draw for them. I mean, third toughest in the conference. They do get 5 home games, but 3 of those are against Kansas State, Utah, and Oklahoma State. And when I talk about win totals, I always talk about, like, man, give me those games on the road, because you're going to have a tough time beating those teams regardless of where you play them. You get them at home, you got a little better chance, but then you're losing 3 home games, right? So, again, they open up with North Dakota State. They're never fun to play. Their next 2 games at Nebraska, who we're high on, everybody's high on, right? That's a primetime game. They're going to be ticked for what happened last year. They want to stick it to Colorado, especially Matt Rule does. And then I know Colorado State is not anything great in the Mountain West, but that game went to double or triple overtime last year in Boulder when The Rock was there, Lil Wayne was there, and everybody, they were hyping that up. I mean, they were lucky to win that game against a poor Colorado State team. And then they go to Fort Collins this year. So back-to-back road games there. They got to go to the Bounce House. They got to go to Arizona. You got to go to Texas Tech. And you got to go to Kansas, which will probably be Arrowhead Stadium at this point. And then, like I said, you get Kansas State, Utah, and Oklahoma State at home.
Yeah, they're not drawing hardly any of those bottom-tiered Big 12 teams. Like I said, the schedule makers didn't do them any favors. The thing with Colorado, I think they are better this year, but because of this schedule,
again, they get to 6 wins.
Yeah, and in this year of, like you said, the year of unbalanced, the times of unbalanced schedules, it's not only who they're playing like overall, but it's the type of teams they're playing with the physicality. I mean, North Dakota State is going to show up with a physical bunch and try to pound the football. Matt Rule's Nebraska team is a physical football team on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, etc. All of these teams play a physical brand of football. So can Colorado hold up on both sides of the line of scrimmage across an entire schedule? I don't think they can. Their skill position can play with anybody in the country, but all that creates is just exciting football and etc. But that's not going to win you games overall.
Yeah. Kelly Ford's got them favored in 4 games as of right now. So that means they got to pull a couple upsets and not blow some of the games they're actually favored in, like that game at Colorado State. Baylor, if Dave Aranda turns around, they'll be good too. Cincinnati, we're not sure about them, but that's the game that they're most favored in conference. So, and assuming they beat North Dakota State, assuming they beat Colorado State, assuming they beat Baylor, assuming they beat Cincinnati, okay, that's 4 wins right there. You got to find me 2 more against Nebraska, UCF, Kansas State, Arizona, Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. And
it's going to be tough. I really won't be shocked if Colorado goes 3-9, and I won't be shocked if they go 6-6, 7-5. But what's more likely? Probably somewhere in the middle, probably around that 5-7 range. I didn't take it just because of the skill that they do have and how good Shadur is. But don't blame you for taking 5.5.
I think 3-9. I think 4-8 is a real possibility, and so that gives you a little bit wiggle room too for the under 5.5. So I think that's a pretty solid bet. So I'm going to go with Colorado under 5.5.
All right, I am going to now take a trip to Ames, Iowa. and take a look at Iowa State, the Cyclones, have a win total of 7.5. Iowa State last year, they played the most freshmen in the entire country. They had key players before the year even started last year that they lost going into the year due to like a, gambling scandal. But they started off slow, but they finished the season going 6-3 down the stretch. And as far as returning production goes, like you said about Oklahoma State a minute ago, teams like Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, Iowa State. I mean, Iowa State returns 20 starters off of last year's team. So they played a ton of freshmen and a lot in their two deep, all return. Offensively, you already know it, baby. We are a Rocco Beck Stan podcast account here. We love us some Rocco Beck. The dude was Big 12 Freshman of the Year last year. He wasn't supposed to start. One of the guys that got mixed up in the betting scandal was their starting quarterback, so they ended up having to throw Beck out there and let him play early, and he didn't disappoint. He threw for over 3,100 yards which was good for third most in Big 12 history for freshmen. They returned literally their entire offense. One thing to keep an eye on, they did lose their offensive coordinator to Sean McVay and the LA Rams. And if you know anything about Sean McVay and his overall acumen when it comes to offensive football, if he's poaching somebody from your staff, you're doing something right. So Campbell promoted from within. They're excited about him. Taylor Mouser was a tight ends coach last year. Defensively, longtime defensive coordinator, John Heacock, he's back. His defenses at Iowa State have finished top 3 in the Big 12 in total defense every single year since 2017. And almost the entire two deep is back defensively. So again, with a win total of 7.5, you got to find 5 losses on this schedule. And, I love the fact that they get Kansas State at home. They beat Kansas State last year in that crazy Farmageddon snow game. I love the fact they get Texas Tech at home. They get UCF at home. They do play Houston. They do play Cincinnati. Non-conference wise, they play North Dakota. They play Arkansas State. They've had their troubles with Iowa. I can't sit here and say that they're going to win at Iowa in Iowa City, but can they win that game? Yes, they can. I've personally got, again, odds makers are doing really good this year with these win totals. It's been hard to find some that just completely jump off the page to me.
Yeah, they're catching on.
They are. But with Matt Campbell at Big 12 Media Days was telling people that he thinks his most talented roster that he's ever had. Just overall skill position talent in general, that's something that Iowa State has not had overall. They've got it with this team. They've got a ton of experience. I think Iowa State is definitely one to keep an eye on as far as competing for the Big 12 championship in general. Old Josh Pate, our boy Josh Pate, he's actually picked them to be in the Big 12 championship game as well. He may have even picked them to win the Big 12. But I like Iowa State over 7.5. I think I've got them going 9-3, one of those going 9-3. So from what I've projected, I've got 2 games there to buffer with. So I'll take Iowa State over 7.5.
Okay. Last one I got for you. It's the dicey one. It's the one I'm least sure of, but I just kept coming back to it. And that is TCU under 7.5. And I know you were kind of talking about them over a little bit, but I was just kind of trying to project schedules and everything, and I just kept coming back I just think they're going to be 6-6. Their defense really let them down last year. Joe Gillespie out of there, Andy Avalos in. He's moving to a 4-2-5. Yeah, he's moving, and all they've done is hire like every previous head coaching, position and just put them on their staff somewhere. But they're moving to a 4-2-5. Problem is they did not fill that Dominic Williams-sized void that we talked about.
Yeah.
And he went to Oklahoma, and that was a big get for Oklahoma. We talked about that at the time.
Yeah.
And TCU didn't backfill that, and they're going to have trouble stopping the run once again. The offense, they lose nearly every starting offensive lineman. So to me, TCU just doesn't seem good enough in the trenches especially on the offensive line with Josh Hoover coming back. I know he played last year and he gets the second year in the new offensive coordinator system. But when he was pressured last year, he completed 46% of his passes. And if you're losing nearly every starting offensive lineman, I can't see that improving that much unless you're bringing in a ton of guys in the transfer portal, which they didn't do. Now, for them, the 5 Big 12 home games helps. Playing those 9 games, you get 5 home games, 4 road games. Their non-conference, too, they get a road game to start off at Stanford, which I think they can win that. And then they get LIU, playing a FCS team. So they're going to win that one. But win total 7.5. So you got to get to 8 wins, right? So I got to find 5 losses on this schedule. Well, they play at SMU and at Kansas in back-to-back weeks in 4 and 5. So I think they're going to lose both of those games. And they play at Utah in week 8. Tough to win in Rice Eccles. That's 3 losses. The rest of their schedule is pretty favorable in weeks 11 and 13 with a bye sandwiched in there. They've got Oklahoma State and they've got Arizona. We talked about Oklahoma State a lot. We're going to get to Arizona here in a little bit. It's tough for me to see you beating both of those teams, right? So that's 4 losses. So right now you win the rest of your games, you're 8-4, you beat me. Okay. But the other home games they get are UCF. That's a tough one in week 3. You get Texas Tech in week 9. That's a toss-up game right there in my mind. And then you go to Baylor. And again, we've talked about Baylor being a candidate for Dave Aranda, kind of bouncing back, being on the hot seat. Obviously, we pay players. That's what they're doing down at Baylor now.
Bags you, baby.
Bags you. So they should be improved this year versus last year. And that's kind of a rivalry game. TCU Baylor has gone back, quite a ways. And so I just think it's not a guarantee by any means. And I don't feel as confident as I do in that one as the Colorado one or the UCF one, like you and I both do. But I think under 7.5 wins. I think, TCU gets a 7-5. That's a good win. You're building on last year's 5-7 campaign. But I think that's still a good bet. TCU under 7.5.
Yeah, so far we've done the ACC and we've done this one. That's the only one that I kind of disagree with you on. But I don't disagree enough to pull the trigger on TCU over 7.5 because yes, we can honestly take a look at all of these schedules in the Big 12 and find losses, find wins, etc. But it's just it's unbelievable and hard to imagine. I mean, dude, this team played for the national championship game like 21 months ago. Unbelievable. Yeah. But I love the hire of Andy Avalos, the defensive coordinator. They recruit well. They do a good job in the transfer portal. But I see your point on as far as the trenches are concerned. They didn't really backfill, losing the big boy there to Oklahoma, Dominic Williams there on the defensive line, and they're not really backfilling some of the losses they had on the offensive line. So it'll be interesting to see what Kendall Briles can work around. OC Kendall Briles can work around that this year with the lack of the offensive line trouble there. But I've got one more for you as well. Again, man, I'm going with coaches in this wide open Big 12. Kansas State. There are a few shops out there that have Kansas State with a win total of 9, and that is at plus 125 as well for this. So I'm getting plus money on this, which I love, and they have the easiest schedule in the Big 12 this year. They don't play Utah. They don't play UCF. They don't play TCU. And they don't play Texas Tech.
And that Arizona game is a non-conference game.
And the Arizona game is a non-conference game. So as far as bottom-tier teams are concerned in the Big 12, they literally play all of them. They play Arizona State. They play Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and Colorado. And Chris Kleiman, he's won at Kansas State and Chris Kleiman. They've won 9 games 3 times since 2019. The consistency that Kansas State has shown since 2019 has been fantastic. And Chris Kleiman before that, when he was at North Dakota State, all the national championships he won at North Dakota State at the FCS level. Last year they had 4 losses. 4 of their 5 losses were by 1 possession. And in their 9 wins last year, they won those games by a margin of 22.5 points per game. But one of the most exciting young quarterbacks in all of college football is Avery Johnson, the dual threat, do-it-all quarterback that we saw come into some games last year and run that long veer read option deal that Kansas State was running out of the shotgun. And he ran wild, had multiple games where he was scoring touchdowns all over the place. He's back. And even if the quarterback there that went to Ohio State, I just went blank.
Will Howard,
that went to Ohio State. If he would have stayed, most people think that Avery Johnson would have won the job. So Avery Johnson's back. Their running back, DJ Giddens, is back. Dylan Edwards, the exciting young freshman last year at Colorado, who's from the state of Kansas. He transferred from Colorado to Kansas State. They've got weapons in the transfer portal at receiver. So, I mean, they lost their offensive coordinator, Colin Klein, to Texas A&M. At first, I thought that was going to be a huge blow, but Chris Kleiman did a wonderful job of backfilling that with Matt Wells, who was, former head coaching at Utah State and at Texas Tech. He's got a history of doing a really good job with his offenses as well and doing a good job with quarterbacks in general. And all of the talk coming out of camp is just how good Avery Johnson has looked. So you got to be excited about this Kansas State squad. And again, with a win total of 9, even if they go 9-3, you push. So I'm looking at this schedule again. UT Martin, win. At Tulane, I mean, that's not some easy game having to go down to the Big Easy and play at Tulane, but I'm going to say they win that game. They get Arizona at home. I think they win that game. They're at BYU. Again, not easy having to go to Provo, but they're a lot better than BYU. They win that game. So that's 4-0. They then get Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy at home in Manhattan. They're going to be favored in that game. I'll say that Kansas State wins that game. That's 5-0. They then get a bye week, which is not good for Colorado. Chris Kleiman, coming off a bye, is going to go to Boulder and play Colorado. I think they win that game. They play at West Virginia. That's a trouble spot. I'm going to say they get upset and lose in Morgantown at West Virginia. They play Kansas at home on October the 26th. They own Kansas. Until Lance Leipold in Kansas and the Jayhawks flip the script on that, I'm not going to sit here and say that Kansas State's going to lose to Kansas. That they win that game. They win against Houston. They get Arizona State at home, win. Cincinnati at home, win. And then they play at Iowa State and Farmageddon, the last game of the year. One of the best names for a rivalry game, by the way, Farmageddon. They play at Iowa State last game of the year, November the 30th. That's a toss-up game. Let's just say they happen to lose that game. That's 10-2. But I want you to also think about that schedule that I just ran down. You can see undefeated as well. So with a win total of 9, I'll take the Purple Cats in Kansas State and Chris Kleiman over 9 at plus 125.
Okay. Before we get to championship game picks, let's throw out a couple dark horses. And we failed to mention it in our ACC preview that released a couple days ago. But dark horses to us are teams that are outside of the top 4 of the odds board. So if you look at the odds board to win the Big 12 championship, you got Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and UCF. So those teams are off limits. Dark horse I'm going to roll with Arizona, second best quarterback, probably the first, maybe second best wide receiver if you consider Travis Hunter a wide receiver. Brent Brennan coming in. They've got a solid defense. They are plus 1,200, 12-1 on FanDuel to win the title and plus 450 to make the title game. And they've got the 5th easiest schedule in the conference. Again, that Kansas State game is a non-conference game, so this doesn't affect them for their conference record and making that conference championship game. They go to Utah, UCF, and TCU. Those are going to be tough games. But again, going into Arizona is tough. And for Texas Tech, Colorado, West Virginia, Houston, and Arizona State, it's going to be even tougher. So they don't play Kansas State in conference. They don't play Oklahoma State. They don't play Kansas. They don't play Iowa State. That's 4 really good teams that you're not fighting for that championship game appearance. So I'm going to take Arizona as my dark horse to make the Big 12 championship game.
So I've got 2 teams here. I already mentioned Iowa State a minute ago, over 7.5. I think Iowa State, with the returning production that they've got this year, is a really good shot. They're at plus 950. I think they've got a shot to make a run at the Big 12 championship. And My other dark horse, a team we haven't mentioned, and I wanted to take their win total over so bad, but their schedule is pretty brutal. You know, they play Penn State in the non-conference, and their Big 12 schedule is pretty tough, and that's West Virginia. And the Mountaineers there, Country Roads, Take Me Home, and Neil Brown. Country Roads, Take Me Home indeed at plus 1,600 odds. That it would be a fantastic payday if you put a little money there on West Virginia at plus 1,600 to win the Big 12. I mean, they won 9 games last year. They returned. They led the Big 12 in rushing last year. They were like top 5 in the country overall in rushing last year. They returned literally all of that production. Both tailbacks, quarterback Garrett Green. Their offensive line is going to be one of the strengths of their team again. Neil Brown took over calling plays last year because he was on the hot seat going into last year. He said, I'm going to take matters into my own hands and leave it up to me and bet on myself. It worked. Like I said, West Virginia won 9 games. Defense was a little suspect last year, but they made some solid moves in the transfer portal on the defensive side of the ball. So I like West Virginia as a dark horse to, like, if you're taking a shot at somebody with longer odds. Again, in this conference, not a whole lot of separates a lot of these teams. I have no idea why West Virginia is all the way down at plus 1,600 and compared to some of these other teams. So I think that's worth taking a little shot at.
Okay, I like it. Conference championship prediction time. I'm going to start us off here. Again, like I said, I had 4 teams finishing 7-2 in the conference. And without knowing how the tiebreakers are going to work itself out, it's almost impossible to make a prediction here. But I'm going to go with the old faithfuls, and that's Kyle Whittingham versus Mike Gundy. I'm going to go Oklahoma State versus Utah in the conference championship game. As best I could, that's how I saw like the head-to-heads and the common opponents and all that stuff breaking down. Oklahoma State versus Utah, and I'm going to go with Utah in their first year in the Big 12. Winning the conference, making the playoff. Utah and Kyle Whittingham finally getting that playoff. They finally get to make some noise. And we're talking about a team that's, for some reason, just being in the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and obviously the Mountain West, they get looked down upon a lot. But when they've played some of these big games, even in the regular season versus, Florida, or in bowl games back when guys weren't sitting out as much, they played really well against a lot of really good teams, either in the Rose Bowl or the Sugar Bowl or whoever. So they're not far off a lot of these teams that they may see in this playoff. And if they get a home game in Rice-Eccles, as an 8 seed or a 7 seed, watch out, because they could be in the quarterfinals pretty easily.
I would love for one of the Southeastern or like ACC teams, team from the like East Coast, like lower Southeastern corner of the country, have to go to Rice-Eccles.
Oh yeah,
for a playoff game. That would be fantastic.
It would be cold there too, but yeah, just ask Florida how fun Rice-Eccles is to play in.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And we already talked about it. They're like 32-3 since 2018 at home. So you've got the Utes bringing it home. Yep. Okay, I've got Utah versus Kansas State, the 2 odds-on favorites. I'm going to go with chalk in this one. I think they're two of the best coaches in the country, 2 of the best coaches in this conference. Love Kansas State's schedule, like we've already touched on. And I think Kansas State has a better record going into the Big 12 championship game against Utah, and I think Utah ends up winning the Big 12 championship as well. I think that Cam Rising in this bunch, this is the year they've been pointing to, so I'll take Utah as the Big 12 champion and represent the Big 12 in the 12-team playoff. It'll just be interesting to see if they can get a second team in the tournament.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, these are fun. These are super fun to do. Wow. Talking about win totals, kind of getting that gambling itch back going. And college football is only 16 days away, a little over 2 weeks from week 0. I'm watching Florida State and Georgia Tech tee it up in Ireland. So again, thank you guys for listening. Next week, we'll bring you the heavy hitters, the Big Ten and the SEC, as we get hyped up and more hyped up for the start of college football. Again, just subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, follow us along on all of our social media channels. We appreciate you guys. And until next time.